In this series of videos I'm attempting to repair and restore a Sharp MZ80A computer. In the previous videos I've stripped the unit down, noted a few repairs that are required, mostly to the casework. It was damaged in shipping, fairly annoying because it's otherwise an extremely nice machine in very good condition. So in this video we'll be looking at the kind of intermediate work, getting the units ready for reassembly. So the first thing I've done is replace the usual exploded caps in the power supply. As I always say, it's best not to switch these on if you find them when they've been in storage for a number of years, because this almost always happens, and you can see they kind of self-destruct. So luckily only two of them in this unit, and I've replaced both of them and cleaned up the power supply. It's come up well, and I have tested it at full load out of the unit, and that works very well. So that's that component done. I've cleaned up the plastic parts. I've cleaned and polished the window on the cassette drawer, so that's now all complete. And the breakage on this is not actually on the door, it's on the main case, so we'll come back to that in a few minutes. I've cleaned and done some static testing on the main board. Now of course it booted, so seemed to be in fairly good order, but I've taken out all the RAM chips, cleaned the pins, put them back. Some of the chips are in sockets, and a couple had started walking their way out. They've got a tendency over time to gradually walk themselves out of the socket, and it's a fairly common problem on machines of this age. But this is otherwise in very good condition, so hopefully that is ready to go back into the unit. I've polished up the display cover. It was in fairly good condition but had a lot of swirls and scratches on it, so I polished up both sides of that. Cleaned up the monitor, can't find any faults with that. Cleaned the main chassis, and so that brings us on to the main repair that's required, which is the main case. So I'll get that onto the bench. So I've glued up the main brake in this case, and you can still see the crack. Unfortunately, what tends to happen is when these break along the brake line, small particles break off the kind of corner where the fracture occurs, and it always leaves a line. Can't really feel anything, but you can kind of see the line there. You can probably see that. Don't know how well it shows up, but it's nice and strong now. I've made a couple of doublers up for the inside, and that's been epoxied into place. I said I don't normally brighten plastic cases. I tend to leave them. Some people call this, some people refer to it as retrobrighting, but I decided to do that in this case. The case was broken anyway, so I thought I might as well try and bring it back to as new condition as I could. So it's been through one session. Unfortunately, it didn't have much sunlight yesterday when I was doing this, so it needs another session, but already it's way better than it was, and most of the yellowing has gone. Another 4 or 5 hours and this should be pretty much as good as new, apart from the broken parts. And the second thing I had to repair on this was the pivot for the cassette door. And what had happened is there are two small pivots that the door sits on. So there's one here, and there should be another one on this side, but unfortunately the one on the left had broken off. Now I did find it inside the machine when I took this apart, and so I had various options I could use to repair this. Now because of where it is in the machine, on this side it's just obviously inside the cassette drawer. If I turn this on its end, and it's probably fairly hard to see, but it sits here, so this is where the pin comes through, or it would if the hole went all the way through, but the pin should be about where the tip of this is, pointing in towards the cassette door. And so the question is how to go about repairing that. So I'm just going to zoom you in so you can see this a bit more clearly. So it is possible to use metal pins to repair this, or drill through the small lug that's supposed to go on here, and then drill through the case, put a metal pin in there and glue it all together. I tend not to use metal I probably use carbon fibre 99% of the time. Number of reasons for that. Firstly, it's quite difficult bonding reliably to metal. Also, when you've got such small clearances in brittle plastic, the metal tends to expand and contract over time, and it will cause the plastic that's around it to start cracking. So I tend not to use it when at all possible. What I tend to use, as I said, is carbon fibre, and you can get this from model shops. It's very strong, and especially for short pieces like this, it's probably better than steel. In fact, I'm almost convinced it's better than steel for several reasons. One is it doesn't expand and contract like steel, but also it will take glue much more easily. It will kind of absorb the glue, and it is a much stronger glue joint when you're finished. So what I did was to take the original boss, little pivot, that's the little white piece. I drilled it out, so I drilled down through the centre. Don't know how clearly this is coming out. So I drilled down through the centre, cut a piece of carbon rod, that's a good close fit in there. I haven't glued this on yet, but I'll glue this all together at the same time. And then what I had to do, as you can see, is drill a hole through the centre here. So the way I go about drilling this, you can't really drill it from the other side. When we just looked, you'll see there's a kind of a rib there, and you have to drill half. The hole kind of goes halfway onto the rib and halfway off, so you can't start the hole properly on the other side. So what I use is one of these. This is a brooch holder. I make clocks as well, so I tend to have some tools like this, but these are very useful. And the way I do this is there is another pin on this side that's still there, so set this to the correct length with the correct size drill, and then you can put the back end of this onto this pin, and that will hold the whole thing in line, and you can then just spin this around and drill through. It will drill through in the correct location. What I then do is get the glue ready. In this case I'm going to use very thin epoxy. Take this off, epoxy the carbon fibre rod, slide this on, some more epoxy, and then slide this whole thing together, clamp it and wait for it to set up. That will be an extremely strong join, and the reason for using the original plastic is to make it look a bit more authentic, and also of course it will be the right size and shape. So that just needs gluing in now, and that will be that repair done. That will be the case more or less finished, apart from as I say, another few hours in the sun with some Retrobrite, and get this as good or as close to new as I can. As I said, I don't normally do that, but in this case, because the case was broken anyway, I thought I might as well. So that will be the case then complete. So the next thing we need to look at once this case is done is the cassette drive. So we'll get that onto the bench, have a quick look at that, and make sure it's in good order before we start the reassembly. So that's the pin refitted. It's obviously very secure now. It's mostly carbon fibre. It's got the original plastic around the outside, so it looks the same. You can't see this black end once the drawer is refitted, because it sits within one of these recesses. So I'll fit the drawer later once I've got the cassette mechanism refitted. But the other advantage in this method is if we look on the inside. So hopefully you can see this is the pin sticking out, and the carbon fibre, I've extended it back, and the drill hole kind of cuts halfway into this rib, so it goes all the way through this thicker section, and I've extended it right back to the end of the rib, and I put a fillet of epoxy across the end of the carbon fibre, so the carbon fibre rod now extends from this point all the way through to the end of the pin, so it's now extremely secure. In fact, it's a lot stronger now than it would have been when it was new. So that's that repair. That's the case finished off, apart from a bit more brightening, but I can now turn my attention to the cassette drive. The cassette drive in these units is quite a nice little drive. It's quite well made. It's a nice solid chassis, and unlike some of the cheaper drives, it's quite rigid in its own right. It doesn't rely on the case that it's screwed into to work. So all I need to do with this is to check that it's all free. Probably going to need to lubricate the main drive wheel. They do tend to get a bit sticky and slow after a while. And I will also need to give the capstan and pinch roller a really good clean. The only bit on this that's kind of hard to really deal with is the start switch, and if you push the start button you'll see there's a slide that moves across, and if we turn this over, there are a couple of yellow wires here and they go down to a switch. The easiest way I've found to clean these is to take the two screws out of the board. You can then kind of tip the board up and out of the way, and then there's a screw that holds the switch body in, and you can take that out. The switch will then come out fairly easily and you can then give the contacts a nice clean. And the rest of it is just kind of typical cleaning lubrication. The belt for the counter is a bit loose. I might change that. I noticed when I was trying to use it the counter didn't always turn when I started playing or rewind, so I think it's just the belt slipping. The rest of it seems okay, just needs a clean, so I'll get that done and then we can look at getting this refitted. So I'll remove the switch. This is it here. I don't know how clearly you're able to see this, but these are the contacts that need cleaning, and it's just I tend to use something like 3000 grit emery. Put it between, fold it in half, put it between, gently squeeze the contacts together, rub it a few times and it should clean them. Don't go overboard. These are quite flimsy. There's not a great deal of meat on them, so you don't want to take too much off. But they are quite a light contact, and they do need to be clean to work reliably. And then once it's clean, just slide it back in, put the screw back in, tighten that, refit the board, and then that's done. So I'll get that completed, get the rest of the drive cleaned up, and then it's ready to go back in. So I just thought I'd show the process. A piece of 7000 grit emery paper, gone to 7000 grit because the contacts do look fairly clean, and so this is just really a quick polish. There's no real corrosion on them or oxidation, so just put the paper in between, fold it in half of course, gently squeeze the contacts together and then just gently work it back and forth a few times. Okay, and that should be it. I will check that under a microscope, and if it all looks good this can go back together, and I will also check it with a meter before I refit this, and assuming it's all okay I'll refit the board and then this can go back into the machine. The tape drive is now ready to be refitted. Cleaned the capstan, pinch roller. I did put a new belt on the counter, but I left the main drive belt. The main drive belt actually seems okay. Cleaned it, a bit of lubrication in a couple of points, but I don't really put too much lubrication on cassette drives. I tested the play switch and that's working fine, and I've cleaned the both heads, and this is now ready to go back into the machine, so we can start reassembly. I've cleaned everything else. I've cleaned the monitor, the chassis. Obviously the top cover is going to need a bit more brightening. I've cleaned the main board, cleaned all the bits and pieces, so we are ready to start reassembly. So that's all the parts now ready for reassembly. I've cleaned everything, everything's come up looking really good. The keyboard's come up very nice and clean. Everything else looks to be in good condition. It did of course run before to a certain extent. Did have a habit of sort of locking up now and again, but the next step of course is to get it reassembled. So in the next video we'll put all these parts back together and see if the machine still works.